What's going on, y'all? Welcome back to 8 Cubes. I am KM Best. He is Lamby series. We're going to be talking about the 8 most important topics in Marvel Snap for the week, starting with Ajax, a 5/7, with an ongoing ability where it gains 1 power for every card on the board afflicted with negative power. That can mean your cards or your opponent's cards. And this creates a really interesting dynamic with Luke Cage, where when your opponent plays a Luke Cage, you can still get the power from yours. But by the same token, if you want to be an Ajax deck, you probably can't be a Luke Cage deck because then you're denying your Ajax power. Or maybe you can, and you're just saying, I'm going to get all my power from the opposing sides. It's kind of an interesting deck building conundrum. Lamby, what do you think about Ajax?
Okay, so firstly, the funny thing is when I look at these new like mid-rangey cards, they are like not they don't look absolutely fantastic, but they look okay. I just think like, alright, if I generated this from Arisham, this is quite a sick play. That's the first thing I think about. Secondly, yeah, I do think that like what exactly when you mention Ajax deck, the first thing that comes to my mind is like high Evo, Affliction. It's
Mm.
like decent sized, right? Like with Cyclops and like maybe Scorpion, that kind of thing. But like, and also sometimes just natural locations. There's actually quite a few locations that just naturally afflict negative power. So Ajax is like 5/7, and maybe it's like on average 5/10 if you actually have a deck built for it or for certain locations. Is that good enough? I honestly want to try and like upsell this card a bit more, but it just feels very like it's just there. I don't really know what a good like affliction based deck is right now, sort of like specifically high evo. And of course, if you want to play like an Ajax deck, you run your own Luke Cage. But then what is a good Ajax plus Luke Cage deck?
Yeah, so my thought process, and I'll tell you why I disagree with what you just said. I think
Okay.
a lot of people are going to be talking about, oh, I want to play High Evo. Oh, I want to play Scorpion. Oh, I don't think any of that's going to matter. I think much like
Okay.
Gilgamesh, this is only going to be played with the best version of the card that synergizes with it the most. This is much like Gilgamesh is only played with Blue Marvel, which fulfills its condition absolutely. This card is only going to be played with Hazmat. This is not something that
Oh
you want to
yeah.
hyper invest into. You are just hazmatting with this, and that
Oh,
to
that's
me
true.
means that you have this overlap here. You have Ajax and Hazmat, right? What do you want to do if you're going to be a Hazmat gamer? You want to fill their side of the board up. So you have a debris deck, right? If you have a debris deck, maybe you can be a Mockingbird deck. So suddenly we are Ajax, Hazmat, Mockingbird package. Some real power, like a mid range deck with a clog sub theme, is sort of where my head is at here. A Mockingbird Thena deck where the sub theme is clog, like maybe, God forbid, I don't know if this sounds right to you, but like, what if we're Mysterio Vipering? I don't know. But like, there's stuff in my brain that makes me feel like Ajax, if I want to make him good, he pushes me towards that kind of thing. And I think that that is where my head would be at for him because it doesn't require him to do too much. If they're running Luke Cage, who cares? You're still like Athena Mockingbird deck. They're playing a 3/3. You're fine with that, right? If they're not running Luke Cage, suddenly you have like a hazmat that's like a 20-point swing. And that's really interesting to me. That seems appealing to me. That's where my head is at with this card.
Okay, so this is a good point to point out why I feel like I think me and you work very well together, because I realize you have a lot of like, okay, so basically I think I need something to spark my brain, and like you always spark my brain because the moment you said hazmat, I just like put everything together, and then I can further add on to that point, which is I think this makes this card actually becomes best in slot in an affliction hazmat deck, which is
Yeah.
crazy because affliction hazmat was never really a deck, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's always about like you put a lot of stuff on their board, you go some crazy like Wong Odin combo, and everything is white, everything drops by like 20 power, but like this card lets you go tall in an affliction deck, like just because you can, right? Like instead of doing very situational wombo combo things, you just play a hazmat, reduce some stuff, and then the hazmat deck can finally play a 5/12, like just because it's big enough.
I mean,
So I
it'd
feel
be
like
more
this
than a
has been missing.
5/12.
Yeah, possibly, right? Like it's been missing from that style of deck, like just one big thing that like is able to be played into that deck. So I think that's something that we can actually look forward to with Ajax. So yeah, that's actually something that's very real actually.
I wanted to talk a little bit about what looks like a fairly troubled development process for Ajax because within the span of a few weeks, when he was originally data mined, he was a 4/4, and I was very excited about him. Then he was nerfed in a data mine to 5/5. Then he was nerfed in a data or buffed in a data mine to 5/7. And I guess I'm wondering like what it is that makes this card so hard to balance. And I have like a bit of a theory, which is basically like this card completely eats it to loot cage. Like the deck that you're playing eats it to loot cage. So when you're playing this card, you're gonna want to make it have a reasonable body. So the downside is like, okay, it's still a 5/7, right? I don't feel that bad about it. And I get how that can be more appealing than 4/4, but I feel like at 4/4, this card is like a legitimate monster threat. And so I understand nerfing that. Like, I get it. But at the same time, I guess my question is if you're on the Marvel Snap dev team, how do you manage making a card that has such a clear and obvious hard counter? What is your approach to that where you're just like, okay, so Luke Cage exists. How do we sell this? How do we make it exciting to do what this card wants us to do? If, much like when Haiva was released, people are just going to be playing Luke Cage to beat it at least on day one. What does that mean for how they make cards, and how would you approach it if you were one of them?
Right. So this is really interesting because so what happened was it started as a 4/4 and
Mhm.
then it became a 5/5, right? So clearly they did think 4/4 was a bit too good, right?
Yeah, and
And
that's a
5/5 and then it
big nerf.
yes. And then they tested it at 5/5. They realized it was a bit too weak, and then it became 5/7. Do you know why I think 4/4 is actually kind of sick? Like,
Mm.
it's because it's leaning back to the first topic, right?
Mhm.
4/4 means you can 2+4
Yeah,
on turn
hazmat and
6.
this
You
on the
can
same turn.
you
Yeah.
can hazmat this on one turn, and it's like okay. I'm not saying it's not counterable, but like you said, Luke Cage. If Luke Cage is on the board, you don't do the 2+4.
Yeah.
But if Luke Cage is not on the board, you can do the 2+4. But
Mhm.
you can do 2+5, right? So I think this is actually one of the biggest reasons why it's no longer a 4/4 because it fits that whole hazmat use case really, really well. It's like bursts of power,
Yeah.
you know, and I think they might have tested and realized that this burst made that deck a little bit too good. So I think that might be the direction they've going. So like they tested 5/5 too weak and they try 5/7 because you cannot go like final turn burst of power with hazmat plus this thing. Like it has to be like the blue marble Gilgamesh progression, right? Like two
Yeah.
different turns of
Yes.
like stacking stuff. I guess they found it like okay in that like sweet spot.
My instinct is that 5/7 is still a little bit too weak, but maybe
Mhm.
I'm just like way off base, right? Maybe like the fact that it gets invalidated by Luke Cage, like who cares? But I do think that this should probably like right now. It reminds me of Gilgamesh, and it's like, well, they went to 5/9 on that. If they go to 5/9 on this, is it too problematic? I feel like this could look really stupid though, because there's a reasonable chance that this deck ends up like legitimately incredible. Like I do think that like
Mm.
this is such a weird thing that like maybe I'm overrating the impact of a Luke Cage on it. The same way that like right now people are like, oh, Darkhawk beats Arshem, but they have like 5 cards in their deck that beat
Yeah.
Darkhawk now. And so you're just sort of looking at it like, I don't really know. Like part of me is saying there's no way because Luke Cage exists, but I do think that maybe that's not true. That said, it's infinitely easier to get Luke Cage into your deck than it is to get a Darkhawk into your deck. And so the fact that it's easy to tech against Ajax is, I think, actually fairly meaningful.
I think you actually just answered the question yourself with that statement because okay, so let's use the Gilgamesh example at 5/9, right? Blue Marvel on 5, Gilgamesh on 6. It's like 5 cost card and then 5 cost card, right?
Yeah.
So if Ajax was a 5/9, it might actually be a little bit more powerful than the whole Gilgamesh thing because on turn 5,
Hmm.
you can Luke Cage plus Hazmat 2+3 and then play your 5/9 like Ajax. That's why they made it a 5/7 instead of a 5/9. You know, like it's to balance the fact that the activator, the so-called blue marvel of this deck, is only 2 costs, you know.
Yeah,
So I
but
feel
it's
like
like,
that might be a reason why.
I don't know, like Ajax's whole thing is like if you're playing Luke Cage in your Ajax deck, your hazmat is not giving any power to Ajax off of your own cards. And like that might actually be a
True.
useful thing to do. I don't know. Like like this card already effectively has an inbuilt Luke Cage, which is to say
Mm-hmm.
for every power one of your cards loses, it goes to Ajax. It's not literal, right? Sometimes that power distribution does matter, but it is
Not how wide, how tall.
effectively
Yeah.
what I'm sorry?
It's like how wide or how tall, right? Because if you use
Yes.
Luke Cage, you're like going more wide, less tall. But then without Luke
Yes.
Cage, you're just like sucking it all up into one tall ass
Yeah.
tower there.
And like I don't know, like I do feel like maybe we're not like the problem is on day one everyone's just gonna be playing Luke Cage. So it's like I don't
Yep.
really know what to
It's gonna take
do.
a while. It's gonna take a
Yeah.
while.
I wanted to talk about Darkhawk because I think it is slowly starting to fail at doing its job of holding back Arishem. Because Arishem, every good deck I've seen, I think Batman hit #1 with the deck I'm referencing right now, which is an Arishem deck with Rogue and Shang-Chi and Echo and Eliath. And it's just, there's so many ways to answer Darkhawk Mystique at this point where you don't even need to run Darkhawk in your own RSM decks anymore because you have more answers for Darkhawk than you have Darkhawk. So when you play a Darkhawk, your opponent is going to be able to answer it basically all of the time. When you have this Echo and Eliath, where so if you take priority, they're going to be unable to Mystique another lane. Stuff like that's really impactful. I think that Darkhawk has not done a good has run its course, not necessarily forever as an RSM counter, but like I think RSM has gotten to a point where it can reasonably say, I don't really care too much if you Darkhawk me when I have my good hands. And that is a dangerous spot for us to be in, I think, when it comes to a metagame. And I just wanted to, have a little frowny face, sad boy sesh for Darkhawk here because I have not liked what Darkhawk has done in terms of, oh, I need to counter Arshan, let me just play Darkhawk, right? I hope that this leads us to a more open metagame where people are trying more stuff to counter Arishem. And basically, like, we're getting past the Loki v Loki meta where every collector was 20 points. Maybe we're finally moving past that. We're moving to a more sustainable situation. What do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I feel like okay, so Darkhawk is in like almost every random deck right now. You can play Darkhawk in Surfer, you can play Darkhawk in like curve decks. You play Darkhawk in your Tina deck, you play Darkhawk in your Arishem deck, you play Darkhawk in the Darkhawk deck, you play Darkhawk in a clog deck. You just play Darkhawk because Arishem is everywhere, right? So because the Darkhawk is everywhere, the counters to the Darkhawk will naturally be in every deck as well, right? Like people just start putting like rogues in decks that used to not run rogue. People put more Shanks in decks that used to not run Shank. So like this whole Darkhawk thing has become like a burden, right? Because now you rely on the
Yes.
Darkhawk to win the game, and now your opponent has the counter because they know you always have Darkhawk. So like it's definitely falling off. Like it's a cycle, right? It's a cycle. But like I don't think we've reached the point completely that the Darkhawk is just like pure useless yet. Because like
Mm,
at the end of the day, it's still a huge threat versus the Arishem deck. Like the moment you have it, you play it. Even okay, let's just say you don't have Prio, you play it on turn 6, you still win the lane versus the Arishem deck, right? So I mean obviously not the Echo situation, but I think Echo's maybe a little bit less common than like Rogue, I
a
feel.
little less,
So
yeah.
yeah, yeah. So I think Dark Hole will still be around, but definitely gonna decline in play rate. And like I feel like some Arishem decks themselves have also been cutting that package from their own decks.
In line with that, Shang-Chi has become once again one of the most important cards in the game. He is my tech choice in Destroy right now in that one tech slot we have. He is in every RSM deck. He is a way for people to compete with blobs. He has become the guy once again. I think Shang-Chi has really not been in a good spot since the Zabu nerf, I would say, but it got really clear last month that Shang-Chi wasn't doing a lot of great stuff. Now I think we are back in a Shang-Chi heavy meta. What do you think, as someone who's lived through Shang-Chi heavy metas before, what wisdom would you impart to someone who, like, let's say they like started playing after the Zabu nerf? What would you tell them about Shang-Chi, how to approach it, and generally like snapping tips? Are you boomering him? There's like some nuance here because one thing that I've noticed is in Conquest when you have like a tech card in your deck, sometimes you boomer snap to make them pay to see it. You like a
Right.
chew you when people talk about the differences between ladder and conquest, I think that's the most pronounced one. The decks aren't all that different, but the way you approach your cube management, i.e., I'm running Shang, I'm gonna win when I play it. I'm snapping so that you don't know I'm running Shang. Because if you retreat here, you never get to see it, right? Do you have any tips
Yep.
like that for how to approach Shang?
Right. I feel like firstly, this could be like a super long topic, but I feel like we're
Mm.
just gonna give some like simple advice to help
Yeah,
people tide through this like Shang thing right now. Like so, firstly, Shang as like any other tech card, right? Its value is in when it's not known, right? So now it's like the upcoming of the like Shang is back meta. So like in the next few days after this video is released, maybe it's not like the most popular thing ever yet. So you can get away with some like 8 cube scammy situations randomly because people think that the people think that you're still on Rogue, like the counter to beating Rogue and Shang is actually a little bit different. Like yeah, it's actually a little bit different, right? So but anyway, in general, when it comes to tech cards, I feel like what KM said is correct. Sometimes you just boomer snap them, especially in Conquest, because you need them to. They will feel like they want to pay to see because they don't really understand why you snap here. They'll be like, oh, do they run Shang? I kind of need to see, and then it's
you
expensive,
kind of
like
have to know.
4 cubes
Yeah,
to see the thing, right?
yeah.
Whereas on ladder, which I I think is the more common, like commonly played mode, I would say ladder, your Shang is definitely gonna get value regardless, like at any level of play. Because I feel like at the end of the day, it's a card that like it just wins games, right? I mean when Shang was meta and like everything was big, like and like basically now everything is big. There's like so many Shang targets, right? If you snap early enough, when they play a big thing, they even if even if they expect the Shang, right? Even if they expect the Shang and they want to stay for like to see if they can win other locations, you get 2 cubes. If they don't expect the Shang, then you get 4, you get 8. So like I feel like using Shang right now, you don't need to really think too much about like oh how to like outsmart or whatever. You see the big thing on the board, you snap, and then if they want to stay, you get cubes. If they stay and then retreat, well, they are smart. But if they stay and then they stay to the end, yeah, your Shang kills them. So like I think the main point right now is Shang is coming back, and it's really honestly having so many targets right now. There's like every deck has a
Like,
Shang target, right? Like literally every deck has a Shang target, except probably maybe not the next deck.
it's yeah, like then that's why we're talking about the next deck. So I've seen some good stuff from Silky Smoove recently, and a lot of that is being an untargetable deck with tech, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like you have a deck that is you have your Thena package, which is very good. That's really the only thing that's ever going to be shangable, but you can play around that the same way you used to
Yes.
play around Angela. You have Angela, you have Craven, you have Silk moving around. Gwenpool was a pretty solid addition to this deck, just as a good 4/6 with massive upside that can really hit stuff. You have a Shang-Chi on the final turn. You have the ability to fit Mobius into the deck because you are able to, or you need to have a card like that in there. Otherwise, you get run over by Loki. And so you end up in a spot where the deck actually kind of makes sense into this metagame already. I know you're a big fan of Silky Smoove, Lamby. I
Mhm.
know people ask you this a lot. Do you think this is a metagame that could actually support that deck right now? Because I am higher on it than I have been in probably a year. Like,
So this is super interesting. So people every time there's a new meta where there's more mid-rangey things, they ask me,
mm,
is Silky Smooth 3.0, 4.0 or whatever back? And usually I will try, and sometimes it works, but there hasn't been really a meta where Silky Smooth was just the nut since the actual OG Silky
yeah,
Smooth meta, right? And then Brood Apps came out and then nothing mattered. But like anyway, so I think now is a decent spot because this is really that one. Everybody's playing the big stuff, right? Your big
yeah,
Darkhawks, your big like rogues to steal the Darkhawks, all the blobs and stuff like that. And then you just play your own blob, or you just play like Arisham stuff. Like it's all big. So playing a mid-range deck that has no targetable weakness and you can shank them is actually something that kind of works. But the main issue with Silky Smooth right now, which I cannot confirm to be like solved or not solved, is that is it generally able to put up enough points despite being able to shank you? Like, can I shank
yeah.
you and still lose because you are playing like I don't know 4/7s, 4/6, 5/8s, 5/7s that cannot be shanked as well, and I'm playing like maybe mid-range stats which might not be enough, right? Because the Arisham deck plays the big stuff ahead of curve, that's why it's powerful. And sometimes the big stuff is not 10, it's a 9, it's a 8, right? You get rid of the biggest thing, they have the blob with a shank, but they play stuff ahead of curve, which is like 5/9, 4/6, 3/5, and then you still lose because of that. So I think the biggest question with Silky Smooth right now is after I shank you, do I have enough points to win? If the answer is yes, then all right, sweet. And also, like Kia mentioned, this deck got Tina. This deck generally only plays like 2 cards a turn anyway,
Mhm.
right? So this deck got Tina, natural fit, easy card that's I don't know, like a 2/7 and only 2/10 on the final turn, which cannot be shanked. So I think it makes sense that this deck got a bit of like power from Tina. But I don't know for sure if it has enough power despite being able to be a unshankable deck for the most
Yeah.
part.
Like the reason I have always been down on Silky Smooth basically ever since it happened is because the thing that forced Silky Smooth and Brood Abs and whatnot out of the meta that was Loki, right? And since
Mm-hmm.
Loki came out, Shang-Chi has just not been the card, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Silky Smooth and Brood Abs evolved in reaction to Shang-Chi being the card, right? This was like back in the
Yes.
days of Zabu Darkhawk, where Zabu was paired with Enchantress and Shang-Chi, and Darkhawk was your points, and Silky Smoove and Brood Abs made those cards totally irrelevant, and that was a very good and important thing to do. I think that this metagame is the closest we've ever been to being back in that meta, where
Mm-hmm.
cards like Rogue and Shang-Chi are very impactful and they are what decks are going to be relying on a lot of the time. And invalidating them is very impactful, and it's even more impactful against an Arishem because you invalidate one of their actual cards they put in their deck, and they don't have a lot of those in their hand. And so, like, I'm not saying Silky Smooth is good, but I am saying the conditions are there for it to be good in a way that they have not been for a year.
Yeah, I think one thing that's important with that deck, since of course it's only 12 cards right in a deck, so you want to have the Shang, you want to have the small move package, that benefits from moving your stuff and then playing it a bit cheaper and stuff like that. I think we need to isolate the core part of that package, right? Because I feel like Silky Smoove right now needs to have that mid-range stats package that cannot be countered, and then the Shang. But I think it needs a bit more. I think it
Okay.
needs like one more tech card. In the previous meta where Silky Smoove was good, all you needed was the Shang and the stats. Now I think you need the stats, the Shang, and like one just good card that can be used more universally as well. Could be like, I don't know, like a Red Guardian thing, just because it's a good tech that you can play whatever. And then your 5-6 slot, maybe you still Vision, maybe you jump back to a Legion, that kind of thing. Maybe the meta is like you Shank them and then you Legion them and then it's good enough with your early stats, that kind of thing. I think there's room to explore. But yeah, I do think it needs to be a bit different from previously. Like, it cannot just be like a Shank and stats. It has to be
Yeah.
Shank, stats, and maybe one more oomph factor, which I haven't decided
Yeah.
on what it could be yet.
It's missing like a big busted 5. It's missing like a
Yes.
5 that can win a lane. That's what it's missing, like the Gilgamesh of the deck, right? Like it's
Oh
missing,
yeah.
like it just needs like something that's like a 5/15. That deck would go crazy for that.
How's a hazmat? How's if we think of
Think about like
hazmat and
Hazmat
Ajax as
Ajax in there.
hazmat Ajax package, right?
Yeah,
Hazmat Ajax package, because the Silky Smooth does actually play a lot of cards, right?
it's true.
Turn one card, turn two one card, and then like thereon is like two cards only. It's like less than it's not that much, so
I don't know.
can think about that. Yeah.
Let's talk about combo, specifically Phoenix Force and Mr. Negative. The theory behind combo decks is basically that right now people are not going to have the tools to deal with them in a meaningful way. Decks are either going to be reliant on Darkhawk to beat Arishem and then being a little bit lighter on points than they normally would be because of the sacrifices they make to make that happen. Loki's very bad into those decks for very obvious reasons. The cards in the deck are not very good unless you are the person playing the deck. And of course, against RSM, you just have these overpowering, ridiculous numbers that you get to put on the board via Mr. Negative, via Phoenix Force. Do you think these decks are well positioned right now? And compare it to maybe a previous metagame. Like, let's say, do you think these decks are better positioned right now than they were 2 or 3 weeks ago?
I actually think Phoenix Force is like super well positioned actually, because like no one gives a no one cares about it. Like, no one is really trying to like counter it, right? Like, what are the counters that people play right now? They play rogues. They play Shang to a certain extent is not even that great, by the way, versus
Cosmo's
Phoenix
the one
Force.
that comes to mind. Like there are decks
Yes.
that are doing like I will have priority and I will be able to Cosmo your boom boom.
Yeah, 33% boom boom though. So like I think it's okay. So like I really think that most of the counters are targeted at like the big cards in the Darkhawk, the RHM
Mhm.
stuff, the blobs and stuff like that. So Phoenix Force, if you get your combo going, and like I feel like the way of playing the deck hasn't really changed much. You just do your combo and then you win. I don't even think you need to do Nimrod stuff. I think you can do like the jet style whereby you just play like all the movement stuff and then you just make the impossible board. So I feel like Phoenix Force has like very little counter right now, like that people are actually playing. Mr. Negative is very interesting, right? Because they run ongoing stuff and quite a bit, but of course, ongoing stuff you kind of can plop them down all on the final turn, right? Zero cost Iron Man, zero cost Mystique. So like, yeah, if you don't have prior, which you probably don't with Mr. Negative, there you just plop it down all on turn 6 and then you win. But then of course, if there are situations where you need to play the 5 cost Iron Man to play a zero cost Mystique, then you give them a rogue or like something target. So like, I would say Mr. Negative is a bit more iffy to me sometimes, and I think Mr. Negative does draw worse than Phoenix Force on average. I feel.
Let's talk about, I won't call it the meta boogeyman, but it's definitely one of the things in this metagame that makes me more upset than not. That's Clog. We're recording this on a Sunday where Bar Sinister, I believe, is the hot location, which means I'm not logging on to Marvel Snap today. But generally, Clog is one of those things where it creates these extremely frustrating game experiences, but right now I will put aside my distaste for it and talk about why it's well positioned right now. It has a bunch of tech cards that can clean up RSM stuff, and it is able to lock down lanes in a meaningful way against that deck. Your most powerful plays against RSM are Green Goblin Titania type stuff, White Widow Titania type stuff. That's what you really want to do. You clog up one lane on turn 4 if you can, and if that lane is clogged on turn 4, you then have Darkhawk into like Cannonball or Darkhawk into God knows what else. And you also have the ability to magic those lanes and make sure that they are impossible for your opponent to actually get rid of that magic. Arashem's pretty bad at getting rid of that magic. There's kind of just a lot going on in the deck where it's just like, I'm going to lock down one lane and win it, and then I'm going to tech card the other lane away. And that's pretty much how the deck wants to play out right now, and it is a very powerful thing to do.
Honestly, when I think of clock right now, I somehow just link it with mill because they do very similar things,
No,
right?
no, 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 no.
The
Come
whole
on.
Darkhawk thing, isn't it? The whole Darkhawk thing. Don't you think
Well,
it's very similar?
I just think that like you like Mill is the third best version of Clog right now. Does that make sense?
Okay, okay.
I
Yeah,
think
yeah, it makes sense. It
yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah, I think that
Yeah, no,
like
Mill doesn't run the debris stuff, right? So I feel like the debris
yeah,
stuff
like
is actually quite
you're
important
losing
for
out on the
clock.
debris stuff. You're losing out on
Yeah.
maybe a Sage. You're losing out on maybe like Doc
Mm.
or like Dagger in the move package, which is something that's been showing up in the Clog decks recently, thanks to Husky
Mm.
Puppies. Like the mill decks, especially, I think, are the worst version of Clog right now. And I think that's meaningful because for a long time, like you said, they have been linked. But now I think we're
Yes.
finally like, all right, no, this is just an archetype that exists.
Yeah, I do think though. I just want to say that I do think though Doctor Octopus is actually still like it's not still. It's actually like an even better card right now. I
Yes.
feel like I mentioned it a few times also. Like I know it's like yes, Doctor Octopus quote unquote always pulls the Shang, but now there's like so many premium cards to pull. Right, you pull the Blob, you
Yeah,
pull the Darkhawk, you pull the big stuff, and like yes, you may automatically lose your Doc Ock to a Shang or whatever, but you also automatically fill a lane with stuff that you want to Shang as well on the final turn.
yes.
So like Clock has that going for it. Plus it also fills the other lanes with just a bunch of nonsense, right? Like rocks and like you said, the Titania Goblin stuff is just a very simple way to just lock out a lane. So I honestly think it's well positioned actually right now because like you just like isolate like where they can play the big thing as well. Like even if you're not like pulling out the big thing, you know because of the clock they will play the big thing in so and so spots. And generally, there's one way that people don't play against clock well enough. Like I noticed, maybe it's just counterintuitive. They don't self-clock enough. Like they always leave the fourth spot open. Like they always leave that fourth spot open, right? So like personally, when I play against clock, sometimes I just YOLO and just like, all right, on turn 4, I'm gonna put like 12 total power here, and that's it. It's never gonna get bigger, but at least it's not gonna be a goblin in that fourth spot, you know. So I feel like that's how I play, and then like often enough they might have to cover the difference because they cannot actually clock the lane. Because you clocked it yourself with 12 on turn 4, which is decent amount of stats, you know. So I feel like a lot of people just subconsciously they like to play 3 in one location and then like they leave the fourth open because on turn 6, oh, I might need to play a card there. But if you're playing against a clock deck, you never get to play the card there because it's always clocked, you know. So this might be a play pattern thing, but I feel like that might be one way to combat clock as well. Just trying to put it out there. Yeah.
Finally, I'd like to talk about 5s on 4, which I think is a play pattern many players have gotten very sick of in previous metagames. People have been complaining about turn 4
Limestone.
Professor X, turn 4 Leech, turn 4 Darkhawk. Like, these are things. And the issue that I think a lot of people are going to have with Arashem moving forward is that he is the 5s on 4 deck, right? This is like these 5s are fundamentally designed. The base design of these 5s is that you should be playing them on the second to last turn of the game. With Arashem, you are breaking that. Leech is now happening on turn 4. Doc Ock is happening on turn 4. Professor X is happening on turn 4. We've seen how annoying that kind of stuff is in the past. And these are the biggest, I guess you'd call it, sandcastle kickers in the game because they're designed around kicking a sandcastle on the going into the final turn of the game. What they end up doing is impacting the final third of the game, effectively doubling the amount of impact that they're going to have. That ends up being, I think, a deeply problematic issue with Arashem. I'm not going to sit here and be like, they need to, like, he's obviously, like, he's a cool card. A bunch of people love him. I'm not going to sit here and be like, oh, they have to nerf it, right? But I do think I wanted to isolate down that issue and talk about, like, why exactly this card is so annoying to so many people. And I think a lot of it does come down to he is enabling many of the same 5 on 4 kick your sandcastle things as previous hated decks.
Yeah, so I like the point you made up about like the 5s are not impacting a third of the game instead of like
Yeah.
a third. Wait, like more parts of the game than it should impact, right? This is what you're trying to say. Yeah, I like that analogy because like if you think about it, Professor X coming down too early is just like unplayable location on one location. Doctor
Yeah.
Octopus, which I think is the strongest 5 on 4 right now, right? Isolates all the big threats or the tech into one location, which means you don't get countered or you don't get hit with the big stuff in other locations as well, and you can shank them all. And then of course, I know this one is not like so popular, but Legion on 4 actually does matter sometimes as well, right? Like you legion the correct location, like you turn something into a dev's domain, you turn something into like spawning a random negative 2 power ninja, that kind of thing. Like a turn earlier, you know, it also is very impactful. So like honestly, I do think that the 5-on-4 thing is it's annoying, right? Like it's annoying, and that's what Arisham is letting you do. Like outside of being like good at playing cards ahead of curve, it lets you play the annoying and like game ending things ahead of curve, and which is actually very impactful. But other than okay, I'm curious as well. What do you think, like other than like Octopus, Legion, Prof? Is there any other like sleeper 5-on-4 that would like be really impactful right now?
I think those are the big hits. Octopus, Leech,
Yes.
Prof. You mentioned Legion. I think Legion's
Hmm.
like a distant fourth, but it is one of those
Okay.
cards where it's just like, I'm gonna randomly win the game now. Ha ha!
Yeah.
And it's just like, okay, that's great. Thanks. I really appreciate everything that's happening right now. I do think there is something to that where it's just like these cards that just like drastically change the game and how the rest of the game plays out are like obviously the first three are more consistent ways to do that in some order, and Legion is a less consistent way of doing that, but it's the same dynamic where it's like
Hmm.
we were going to have a normal game, we're just getting into it, and as we get into those critical turns you have done something that is completely ridiculous and wasn't designed to be played in that way. And that is, I think, like the main thing that I think a lot of people who are annoyed with RSM are actually annoyed with, and I wanted to try to like put some light on that. All right, y'all, thank you so much for making it through that video. I have been KM Best. He has been Lamby Series. We have been 8 Cubes. Our next video will be on Lamby's channel, I believe. Thank you so much. I thank you again. I'm just kind of repeating thank you at this point. Lamby, take us out before I say thank you a fourth time.
All right. Thank you for not saying thank
Oh,
you the fourth
God.
time. Okay, no, but okay, I wanted to add one thing, which I actually think that this video made me a bit more interested in Ajax. Maybe just like 5% more interested in Ajax, which is good, right? Hopefully you guys also got a little bit more interested in Ajax. But yes, the next video will be on my channel. Thank you so much for being here. Like, comment, subscribe, and we'll see you guys on the next one. Bye bye.